In a quiet little town nestled in the heart of New Hampshire, life moved at its own relaxed pace. People knew each other by name, and everyone had a story to tell. Among them was a young woman who stood out, not because she sought attention, but because her determination and warmth naturally drew people toward her. Her name was Karoline Leavitt. She wasn't your typical small-town girl. She dreamed big and worked hard to make those dreams come true. Whether it was volunteering at community events or speaking passionately about issues close to her heart, Karoline always found ways to leave a mark. Karoline's rise in local politics hadn't gone unnoticed. At just 26 years old, she'd become a voice for change, advocating for policies that supported families, education, and economic growth. But with popularity came challenges. Not everyone agreed with her views, especially those on the opposite side of the political spectrum. Still, Karoline never let criticism shake her resolve. She believed in staying grounded no matter what storms brewed around her. One crisp autumn evening, the town hosted its annual charity gala, an event that brought together residents from all walks of life. The evening promised live music, delicious food, and speeches from notable figures. This year, however, there was an added buzz of excitement. A wealthy businessman from out of town had arrived, someone whose name carried weight far beyond the borders of their sleepy community. His reputation preceded him, Charles Whitmore, a millionaire known as much for his sharp wit as for his liberal leanings. He loved debates, often using humor to mock those who disagreed with him. Though he claimed it was all in good fun, many felt the sting of his words. As guests mingled inside the beautifully decorated hall, Charles made his entrance. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he exuded confidence. Heads turned as he walked through the room, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Yet beneath his charming smile lay a hint of mischief. He enjoyed stirring the pot, and tonight, he seemed particularly eager to find someone to spar with. It didn't take long for Charles to hear whispers about Karoline. Someone mentioned how she'd been gaining traction as a conservative leader in the area. Another commented on her eloquence during public appearances. Intrigued, and perhaps a little amused, Charles decided to test the waters. During his turn, at the podium, he began his speech with a casual tone, thanking the organizers for inviting him. Then, without missing a beat, he shifted gears. "I've heard quite a bit about our hometown hero tonight," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "Karoline Leavitt, is it? They say you're making waves around here." The room fell silent. All eyes darted toward Karoline, who stood near the back, holding a glass of water. She raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing where this was headed. Charles continued, leaning casually against the podium. "Now I'm curious, can you do more than talk?" His question hung in the air, dripping with sarcasm. Some attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others exchanged nervous glances. It was clear Charles intended to make a spectacle of the moment, but Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she set her glass down and stepped forward, her expression calm yet resolute. Without uttering a single word, she walked toward the stage, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. As she approached, Charles gestured dramatically toward the grand piano stationed nearby. "Let's settle this like cultured people, shall we?" he quipped, his tone dripping with mockery. "If you're so talented, show us." For a brief moment, the entire room held its breath. No one knew what to expect. Would Karoline refuse? Would she falter under pressure? But instead of backing down, she simply smiled, a look that said she was ready for whatever came next. With quiet composure, she took a seat at the piano, adjusting the bench ever so slightly. Then, placing her hands on the keys, she glanced up at the crowd, her gaze steady and confident, and just like that, the atmosphere shifted. What started as a tense standoff transformed into something else entirely. Karoline closed her eyes for a split second, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes rang out, soft and delicate, like the opening lines of a poem. Slowly, the melody grew richer, weaving a tapestry of sound that filled every corner of the room. It wasn't just the technical skill that captivated the audience. It was the emotion behind it. Each note carried a piece of Karoline's soul, telling a story only music could convey. Charles watched from the sidelines, his smug grin fading, with each passing second. For the first time in a long while, he found himself speechless. The woman he'd tried to belittle was proving to be anything but ordinary. By the time Karoline played her final chord, the room erupted into applause. Cheers echoed through the hall and several people rose to their feet, overcome by the beauty of what they'd witnessed. Karoline stood up, bowed modestly, and returned to her seat, her demeanor unchanged. There was no gloating, no triumphant smirk aimed at Charles, just quiet dignity. And in that moment, something remarkable happened, not just for Karoline, but for everyone present. A lesson had been delivered, not through words, but through action. True strength lies not in tearing others down, but in rising above with grace and authenticity. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of that gala. The aftermath of Karoline's performance was nothing short of electric. As the applause died down and people returned to their conversations, the room buzzed with a mix of awe and admiration. Some attendees couldn't stop talking about how effortlessly she had handled the situation. Others were still processing the fact that Charles Whitmore, the man known for his biting sarcasm, had been left speechless. It wasn't every day you saw someone turn an insult into a moment of triumph without saying a word. Charles, meanwhile, retreated to a quiet corner of the venue, visibly shaken. He had walked into the gala expecting to entertain the crowd with his usual brand of clever mockery. What he hadn't anticipated was being completely blindsided by Karoline's talent and poise. For all his wealth and success, he realized in that moment that there was something profoundly humbling about witnessing true artistry, the kind that didn't need words or explanations. It simply spoke for itself. As the evening wore on, guests began to filter out, but Charles stayed behind. He couldn't shake the image of Karoline sitting at the piano, her fingers gliding over the keys like they belonged there. It gnawed at him, not because he felt embarrassed, though he did, but because he knew he'd misjudged her. He had assumed she would crumble under pressure, retreat into silence, or perhaps even lash back. Instead, she had risen above it all, with a grace that left him questioning his own behavior. Finally, after what felt like hours of internal debate, Charles decided to approach her. She was standing near the exit, chatting warmly with a group of friends. When she noticed him walking toward her, there was no flicker of resentment in her eyes, just calm curiosity. "Karoline," he said, extending a hand. "I owe you an apology." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, but only for a moment. Smiling gently, she shook his hand. "Apology accepted," she replied, her tone measured yet kind. There was no hint of gloating, no attempt to rub salt in the wound. Just simple humanity. Charles found himself respecting her even more for it. They ended up talking for nearly an hour that night, long after most of the other guests had left. At first, the conversation was awkward. Charles stumbled over his words, trying to explain himself without sounding defensive. But as they delved deeper into their discussion, they discovered surprising common ground. Despite their differing political views, both shared a deep passion for helping others. They talked about education reform, mental health initiatives, and ways to uplift struggling families. By the end of the night, Charles realized that beneath the labels they wore, liberal millionaire and conservative advocate, they weren't so different after all. Over the next few days, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media. Platforms lit up with videos of Karoline's piano performance, accompanied by captions praising her composure and skill. Comments poured in from across the country, with many applauding her ability to handle adversity with dignity. Even some of Charles's critics chimed in, calling him out for underestimating her while simultaneously acknowledging his willingness to apologize publicly. For Charles, the attention was uncomfortable but necessary. He had spent years building a reputation as a sharp-tongued provocateur, and now he was facing the consequences of crossing a line. Yet instead of retreating into defensiveness, he embraced the opportunity to grow. In interviews and social media posts, he openly admitted his mistake, crediting Karoline for teaching him a valuable lesson about humility. "I went into that night thinking I had the upper hand," he wrote in one post. But Karoline reminded me that real strength doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from lifting them up. Karoline, for her part, remained humble despite the sudden surge in popularity. She declined numerous interview requests, choosing instead to focus on the work that mattered most to her, serving her community. However, she did agree to meet with Charles again, this time to discuss potential collaborations. Both were eager to channel the energy of that fateful night into something positive, a project that could bring people together rather than drive them apart. Their meetings quickly evolved into brainstorming sessions filled with enthusiasm and creativity. One idea stood out above the rest: organizing a fundraising concert featuring local artists. The proceeds would go toward education initiatives for underprivileged children, an issue close to both their hearts. The concept resonated deeply with everyone involved, and plans began taking shape almost immediately. Word of the upcoming event spread fast, drawing interest not just locally but nationally. People were captivated by the story behind it, the unlikely alliance between two individuals who seemed worlds apart, yet managed to find harmony. Tickets sold out within days, and volunteers poured in to help with logistics. Local businesses donated food and supplies while musicians signed up to perform pro bono. It was clear that this wasn't just another charity gala. It was a movement fueled by hope and unity. On the morning of the concert, excitement crackled in the air. Volunteers scurried around the town square, setting up stages, arranging chairs, and stringing fairy lights overhead. By late afternoon, crowds began gathering, their laughter and chatter mingling with the faint strains of sound checks drifting through the breeze. Children chased each other playfully, while parents snapped photos in front of the beautifully decorated stage. Backstage, Karoline paced nervously, adjusting her outfit and mentally rehearsing her piece. Though she had performed countless times before, tonight felt different. This wasn't just about showcasing her talent. It was about proving that collaboration could transcend differences. Beside her, Charles watched silently, occasionally offering words of encouragement. Though he wouldn't be performing himself, he had insisted on introducing her during the show, determined to make amends in front of a larger audience. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the stage, lights flickered on, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd hushed as Charles stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady and sincere. "Tonight is special, not just because we're raising funds for a worthy cause, but because it represents something bigger. It's proof that when we set aside our differences and choose understanding over judgment, incredible things can happen." He paused, scanning the sea of faces before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I made a mistake. I underestimated someone extraordinary standing right here with us tonight." Turning slightly, he gestured toward Karoline, who stepped into the spotlight. The audience erupted into applause, cheering as she took her place at the piano. And, as her hands touched the keys, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the music and the promise of a brighter future ahead. As Karoline's fingers danced across the piano keys, the melody that filled the air was nothing short of breathtaking. The notes seemed to rise and fall like waves, carrying with them a depth of emotion that resonated deeply with everyone present. It wasn't just music, it was storytelling without words, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, and her unwavering resilience. For those who had doubted her before, this performance erased every shred of skepticism. And for those who already admired her, it only deepened their respect. The crowd sat in absolute silence, captivated by the moment. Parents held their children close, some mouthing the lyrics to songs they recognized while others simply closed their eyes to absorb the beauty of the sound. Even the youngest attendees, who might not have fully understood the significance of the evening, were spellbound. One little girl in the front row clutched her stuffed animal tightly, her wide eyes fixed on Karoline as if she were watching magic unfold right in front of her. When the final chord echoed into the night, there was a brief pause, a collective breath held by the audience before the square erupted into applause. People stood cheering and whistling, their hands red from clapping. Some wiped away tears, moved not just by the music but by the symbolism of the moment. Here was a woman who had faced adversity head-on and turned it into something beautiful. Her performance wasn't just about skill, it was about heart, courage, and the power of rising above negativity. Charles, standing off to the side of the stage, felt a lump form in his throat. He had apologized days earlier, but hearing Karoline play under these circumstances made him realize how much he still had to learn. Watching her now, surrounded by admiration and love from the community, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This wasn't just a concert, it was a testament to what could happen when people chose empathy over judgment, connection over division. After the initial applause died down, Charles stepped back up to the microphone. His face was serious, but there was a warmth in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I want to say something," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "A few weeks ago, I came here thinking I knew everything about winning arguments and proving points. But tonight, I'm reminded of something far more important. We don't grow by tearing others down. We grow by lifting each other up." The crowd listened intently, hanging on to his every word. Karoline didn't need to prove anything to me or anyone else. She showed us all what grace looks like, and she did it without saying a single harsh word. That takes strength. Real strength. So tonight isn't just about raising money for education. It's about learning from one another and finding ways to work together, no matter where we come from or what we believe. His speech ended with another round of applause. But this time it wasn't just for Karoline, it was for both of them. The unlikely partnership between a liberal millionaire and a conservative advocate had become a beacon of hope, proof that differences didn't have to divide. As Charles stepped aside, he gave Karoline a small nod of gratitude. In return, she offered him a warm smile, silently acknowledging the progress they'd made together. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream. Local musicians took turns performing, each bringing their unique style to the stage. A folk band played heartfelt ballads about unity and perseverance, while a gospel choir brought the house down with soulful harmonies that left no dry eye in the crowd. Between acts, volunteers shared stories of students whose lives had been transformed by educational programs funded by events like this one. Each story added a layer of meaning to the night, reminding everyone why they were there. One particularly moving moment came when a young boy named Tommy stepped onto the stage. Tommy was a student at a local school that had benefited from previous fundraisers. Shy at first, he hesitated before speaking into the microphone. "Thank you," he said, softly, his voice trembling slightly. "Because of people like you, I get to go to school and learn new things every day. My teacher says I can be anything I want to be when I grow up. I think I want to be a scientist." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Tommy beamed, clearly, overwhelmed by the support. By the end of the night, the energy in the square was electric. Strangers hugged, friendships were formed, and promises were made to keep working toward a better future. The fundraising goal had been surpassed long before the final act, but nobody wanted the night to end. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the connections forged and the inspiration sparked. In the days that followed, the impact of the concert rippled far beyond the town square. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the collaboration between Karoline and Charles as a rare example of bipartisanship in action. Social media buzzed with praise for the event, with hashtags like Unity through music trending nationwide. People from all walks of life reached out to express their gratitude, sharing how the story had reignited their belief in the possibility of coming together despite differences. For Karoline, the experience reinforced her commitment to service. She continued advocating for policies that supported families and education, using her platform to amplify voices often overlooked. Her newfound friendship with Charles became a cornerstone of her efforts, proving that even the most unlikely alliances could lead to meaningful change. Together, they launched initiatives aimed at bridging divides, hosting workshops and forums that encouraged open dialogue. Charles, too, underwent a transformation. No longer content to simply mock or provoke, He dedicated himself to fostering understanding. He began attending town hall meetings, listening to concerns from residents on both sides of the political spectrum. He invested in programs that promoted arts education, believing strongly in its ability to inspire creativity and empathy. Though he still held firm to his beliefs, he approached disagreements with a newfound humility, always seeking common ground. Looking back, neither Karoline nor Charles could have predicted how that fateful gala would alter the course of their lives. What started as a challenge fueled by arrogance had blossomed into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Their story served as a reminder that growth often comes from discomfort, that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating others, but about finding ways to connect. And so, as the town returned to its usual rhythm, the memory of that magical night lingered in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. It was more than just a concert. It was a celebration of humanity, a testament to the power of music, forgiveness, and collaboration. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, Karoline and Charles proved that even the smallest acts of kindness and courage could light the way forward. As the weeks passed after the concert, the bond between Karoline and Charles grew stronger. What had started as an uneasy truce blossomed into a genuine friendship, one that surprised not only those around them, but also themselves. They began meeting regularly, not just to discuss charitable projects but to share ideas, stories, and even personal challenges. Over coffee or late-night phone calls, they discovered that beneath their political differences lay shared values, a love for family, a desire to give back, and a belief in the potential of people to do good. Their conversations weren't always easy. There were moments when old tensions flared up, especially during debates about policies or societal issues. But instead of letting disagreements spiral into arguments, they learned to listen, to truly hear each other out. Karoline would explain her perspective with patience, while Charles countered with thoughtful questions rather than dismissive remarks. It wasn't about changing each other's minds. It was about understanding where the other person was coming from. Slowly but surely, this mutual respect became the foundation of their partnership. One day, as they sat in a cozy cafe downtown, Charles leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You know," he said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, "I used to think I had all the answers, that my way of thinking was the only right way. But meeting you has made me realize how much I still have to learn." Karoline smiled, setting her cup down gently. "We all do," she replied. "None of us has everything figured out. The key is being open to learning, from others, from our mistakes, and from experiences like this one." Her words stayed with Charles long after their meeting ended. For someone who had built his reputation on being sharp-witted and self-assured, admitting vulnerability wasn't easy. Yet something about Karoline's calm confidence inspired him to embrace it. He realized that true leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and working together to find solutions. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of their collaboration continued to spread. Inspired by the success of the fundraising concert, other towns began reaching out, hoping to replicate the model. Local leaders saw how music and art could bring communities together, transcending political divides and fostering connections. Karoline and Charles traveled to nearby cities, sharing their story and offering guidance on organizing similar events. These trips weren't glamorous. They often involved long drives, cramped hotel rooms, and endless meetings, but neither of them minded. Seeing the impact firsthand made every sacrifice worth it. In one town, they met a group of teenagers who had formed a band using donated instruments. The kids were shy at first, hesitant to perform in front of strangers. But when Karoline encouraged them to play, their faces lit up with excitement. As they launched into a lively rendition of a classic rock song, Charles couldn't help but grin. "This is what it's all about," he whispered to Karoline, his voice thick with emotion, "giving people a chance to shine." The teens' performance became the highlight of the event, drawing cheers from the crowd and sparking conversations about creating more opportunities for young artists. By the end of the night, several local businesses pledged support for a youth arts program, ensuring that the momentum wouldn't fade once the spotlight moved on. Back home, Karoline and Charles faced new challenges. Not everyone approved of their partnership. Critics accused them of pandering or trying to gain publicity. Some even suggested that their efforts were insincere, claiming that real change required more than concerts and feel-good moments. At first, the criticism stung. Both Karoline and Charles had poured their hearts into their work, and hearing it dismissed hurt deeply. But instead of retreating, they chose to address the concerns head-on. During a town hall meeting, Karoline stood before a skeptical audience and spoke candidly. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said, her voice steady. "And yes, maybe a single concert won't solve all our problems. But what it does do is remind us of what we're capable of when we come together. It plants a seed, a spark that can grow into something bigger if we nurture it." Charles nodded in agreement, adding, "We're not here to claim we have all the answers. We're here because we believe in the power of community. If you see room for improvement, join us. Help us make it better." Their honesty disarmed many of the skeptics. Slowly, opponents began softening their stance, recognizing that Karoline and Charles weren't seeking perfection. They were striving for progress. More importantly, they were willing to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work alongside everyone else. As months turned into a year, the duo's initiatives gained traction beyond what either of them had imagined. Schools received funding for new programs, libraries expanded their resources, and community centers buzzed with activity. Art murals painted by local students brightened once dull walls, and music classes gave children a creative outlet they hadn't had before. The changes may have seemed small individually, but collectively, they transformed the fabric of the community. One particularly memorable project was the creation of a Unity Park. Spearheaded by Karoline and Charles, the park featured sculptures, benches, and walking paths designed by residents of all ages. Each element told a story of resilience, diversity, and hope. A plaque at the entrance read, "Dedicated to the belief that together we are stronger." On the day of the park's grand opening, hundreds gathered to celebrate. Families picnicked on the grass, children played tag near the fountain, and musicians performed on a makeshift stage. Karoline and Charles stood side by side, watching the scene unfold with pride. Neither of them sought the spotlight, yet both knew they had played a role in making this moment possible. Despite their achievements, Karoline and Charles remained grounded. They understood that their work was far from over. Inequality, poverty, and division still existed, not just in their town, but across the country and the world. But they also knew that meaningful change started locally, with ordinary people, doing extraordinary things. And so they kept pushing forward, one step at a time. At a quiet dinner months later, Charles raised his glass in a toast. "To unlikely friendships," he said with a smile, "and to proving that no matter where we start, we can always choose to build bridges instead of walls." Karoline clinked her glass against his, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Here's to never stopping," she replied, "because there's still so much more to do." And with that, they returned to the work they loved, knowing that every challenge, every disagreement, and every triumph brought them closer to a brighter future. As the months rolled on, Karoline and Charles found themselves tackling challenges that tested not just their partnership, but also their individual limits. The Unity Park had been a monumental success, but maintaining momentum wasn't easy. Critics who initially softened their stance began to grow louder again, questioning whether the projects they spearheaded were sustainable or simply feel-good band-aids masking deeper issues. Some accused them of focusing too much on soft initiatives like art and music, rather than addressing systemic problems like affordable housing or healthcare access. Karoline felt the weight of these criticisms acutely. She knew that while arts and education were vital, they couldn't solve everything. Late one night, sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by papers and notes, she sighed deeply. Her phone buzzed. It was Charles calling for their weekly check-in. Though exhausted, she picked up, knowing he'd sense if something was wrong. "You sound tired," he said after exchanging pleasantries. "What's going on?" She hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking." What if we're not doing enough? People are saying we're ignoring bigger problems because they're harder to fix. Maybe they're right. There was a pause on the other end. Then Charles replied, "Do you remember why we started this in the first place? It wasn't to solve every problem overnight. It was to show people that working together is possible, even when it feels impossible. That doesn't mean we can't expand our focus." His words struck a chord. The next morning, over breakfast, Karoline jotted down ideas for new initiatives. By the time Charles arrived later that day, she had a list ready. Together, they brainstormed ways to address some of the tougher issues facing their community, starting with affordable housing. Their first step was organizing a town hall meeting specifically focused on housing. They invited local experts, advocates, and residents affected by skyrocketing rents and limited options. The room was packed, filled with a mix of hopeful faces and skeptical ones. One elderly woman stood up during the Q&A session, her voice trembling as she described how rising costs had forced her to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Another man spoke about being evicted despite having lived in his apartment for decades. Listening to these stories hit hard. Karoline glanced at Charles, seeing the same determination reflected in his eyes. They couldn't fix everything immediately, but they could start somewhere. After the meeting, they teamed up with nonprofit organizations specializing in affordable housing development. Within weeks, plans were underway to convert an abandoned building into low-cost apartments for struggling families. The project required more than just funding. It needed volunteers, legal navigation, and constant communication with city officials. Karoline took charge of rallying support from local businesses and residents, while Charles used his connections to secure additional resources. It wasn't glamorous work and progress was slow, but every brick laid brought them closer to making a tangible difference. While the housing initiative gained traction, another challenge emerged: health disparities in underserved neighborhoods. A report released by a regional advocacy group highlighted alarming statistics about limited access to quality health care in certain parts of town. Many residents relied on overcrowded clinics or avoided seeking care altogether due to financial barriers. Determined to act, Karoline and Charles organized a free health fair in collaboration with local doctors, nurses, and medical students. For weeks leading up to the event, they worked tirelessly, securing sponsors, coordinating logistics, and spreading the word through flyers and social media. On the day of the fair, lines stretched around the block as people eagerly awaited consultations, screenings, and educational workshops. One attendee, a single mother named Lisa, approached Karoline near the end of the day. Holding her young daughter's hand, she thanked them profusely. "I haven't been able to take her to see a doctor in months," Lisa admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "This means everything to us." Moments like these reminded Karoline and Charles why they kept pushing forward, even when the road felt impossibly steep. Change might be slow, but it was real, and it mattered. Despite their successes, balancing personal lives with their growing responsibilities proved challenging. Karoline often found herself skipping meals or losing sleep as deadlines loomed. Charles, too, struggled to carve out time for family and friends amidst endless meetings and travel commitments. Their dedication inspired admiration, but it also raised concerns among loved ones who worried they were burning out. One evening, after wrapping up yet another long day, Charles met Karoline at a quiet cafe. Both looked drained, dark circles under their eyes betraying their exhaustion. Over steaming cups of tea, they talked openly about the toll their work was taking. "We can't pour from an empty cup," Charles said finally, echoing advice he'd once received. "If we don't take care of ourselves, we won't be able to help anyone else." Karoline nodded slowly. "You're right, but I hate feeling like I'm stepping back even for a moment. There's so much left to do." Charles reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over hers. "Taking breaks isn't stepping back, it's refueling. We'll figure this out together." From that day on, they made a conscious effort to set boundaries. They scheduled regular days off, prioritized self-care, and leaned on each other for support when stress threatened to overwhelm them. It wasn't always easy, but it helped sustain their energy for the long haul. As their efforts continued to bear fruit, Karoline and Charles became symbols of hope, not just locally but nationally. News outlets featured their story, highlighting how two individuals with vastly different backgrounds had come together to create meaningful change. Invitations poured in for speaking engagements, panel discussions, and interviews. While flattered, they remained cautious, wary of letting fame overshadow their mission. "If we let this go to our heads, we lose sight of why we started," Karoline reminded Charles during one such interview prep session. "It's not about us. It's about showing others what's possible," he agreed wholeheartedly. "Let's keep the focus where it belongs, on the community." True to their word, every public appearance included calls to action, urging listeners to get involved in their own neighborhoods. They emphasized that no contribution was too small, whether volunteering at a shelter, mentoring a child, or simply lending a neighbor a helping hand. By the end of the year, the impact of their work was undeniable. Affordable housing units opened their doors to families in need. Health fairs became quarterly events, drawing larger crowds each time. Schools reported improved attendance and engagement thanks to enhanced arts programs. And perhaps most importantly, a culture of collaboration began to take root, one that transcended political affiliations and embraced shared humanity. At a New Year's Eve gathering hosted by the town, Karoline and Charles stood side by side, watching fireworks light up the sky. As cheers erupted around them, Charles turned to Karoline with a grin. "Here's to another year of proving people wrong," he said. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, here's to proving them right, for believing in us, even when we doubted ourselves." And as the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new chapter, they clasped hands ready to face whatever lay ahead, together. The new year brought fresh challenges, but also renewed energy for Karoline and Charles. Their partnership had grown into something deeper than either of them could have anticipated. It wasn't just about working together anymore. It was about leaning on each other during tough times and celebrating the small victories along the way. They had become a team in every sense of the word, not because they agreed on everything, but because they trusted each other to keep moving forward, no matter what obstacles arose. One of their first big projects that year was tackling food insecurity in the community. A local nonprofit had shared alarming data showing that nearly 1 in 5 families struggled to put meals on the table regularly. Grocery prices were rising, jobs were unstable, and many households simply couldn't keep up. For Karoline, this issue hit close to home. She remembered her own childhood, when money was tight and some nights dinner consisted of whatever could be stretched from the pantry. This wasn't just statistics to her, it was personal. Charles, too, felt a deep connection to the cause. Growing up wealthy, he had never experienced hunger himself, but he often thought about how much privilege played a role in shaping his life. He wanted to use that privilege now to make a difference. Together, they decided to launch a mobile food pantry, a truck equipped with fresh produce, canned goods, and essential supplies that would travel to neighborhoods most in need. Getting the mobile pantry off the ground required more effort than they initially anticipated. Funding was an obvious hurdle, but so was logistics. Coordinating with farmers, grocery stores, and volunteers took countless hours of planning and negotiation. There were days when setbacks threatened to derail the entire project. Delivery delays, equipment malfunctions, even pushback from skeptics who doubted its effectiveness. But Karoline refused to let frustration get the better of her. On particularly rough days, she reminded herself why they were doing this. "If we can feed just one family tonight," she told Charles during a tense meeting, "then all of this is worth it." He nodded, drawing strength from her determination. Slowly but surely, pieces began falling into place. Local businesses donated food and supplies, while residents signed up to volunteer as drivers or packers. By spring, the mobile pantry made its debut, rolling into neighborhoods with music playing softly from speakers and cheerful banners fluttering in the breeze. The response was overwhelming. Families lined up early, eager to stock their kitchens with fresh fruits, vegetables, and staples. Volunteers worked tirelessly, loading bags and chatting warmly with recipients. One elderly man broke down in tears after receiving a box filled with groceries. "I haven't had fresh tomatoes in months," he said, clutching the bag tightly. Thank you. Karoline stood nearby, watching quietly as moments like these unfolded. Her heart swelled with pride, not because she sought recognition, but because she saw firsthand how collective action could transform lives. Charles joined her, handing out flyers with information about additional resources available to struggling families. This is what it's all about, he murmured, echoing her thoughts. As the mobile pantry gained momentum, another opportunity presented itself. A mentorship program aimed at empowering young people. Many teens in the area faced barriers to success, whether due to lack of guidance, limited access to extracurricular activities, or simply feeling disconnected from their peers. Karoline and Charles envisioned a program that would pair students with mentors from diverse fields, arts, science, business, and beyond, giving them exposure to different career paths and life skills. They reached out to professionals across industries, appealing to their sense of community responsibility. To their surprise, dozens agreed to participate. Lawyers offered mock trial workshops, artists taught painting classes, and engineers led robotic sessions. The program quickly became a safe space where kids could dream big and explore possibilities they might not have considered otherwise. One Saturday afternoon, Karoline visited a robotics session held at the local library. She watched as a shy 12-year-old boy named Alex carefully assembled parts under the guidance of a patient mentor. When his creation, a simple motorized car, finally moved across the table, his face lit up with pure joy. "Look, I did it!" he exclaimed, turning to high-five his mentor. Karoline smiled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Moments like these reinforced her belief in the power of mentorship. These weren't just lessons. They were lifelines, offering hope and direction to young minds navigating uncertain futures. Despite their successes, Karoline and Charles knew they couldn't rest on their laurels. Every victory came with reminders of how much work still lay ahead. Affordable housing waitlists remained long, healthcare gaps persisted, and food insecurity continued to plague vulnerable communities. But instead of letting these realities discourage them, they chose to see them as motivation to keep pushing forward. One evening, as they sat on a park bench overlooking Unity Park, the same park they had helped create, they reflected on how far they'd come. Fireflies danced in the twilight, casting a soft glow over the scene. "You know," Charles said, breaking the comfortable silence, "there are days when I wonder if we're making any real difference. The problems seem so big sometimes." Karoline nodded thoughtfully. "They are big. But remember what you told me last year? We don't have to solve everything at once. Even small steps matter." "And look how far those small steps have taken us," he replied, gesturing toward the park buzzing with activity. Couples strolled hand in hand, children laughed as they chased each other around the fountain, and musicians strummed guitars near the gazebo. "We built this together," she smiled, leaning back against the bench. "And there's so much more we can build if we keep believing in each other." Their journey wasn't without sacrifices. Both Karoline and Charles had given up parts of their personal lives to dedicate themselves fully to their mission. Friendships had been strained, vacations postponed, and quiet moments replaced by endless phone calls and meetings. Yet neither regretted their choices. They found fulfillment in knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. One day, during a rare moment of downtime, Charles asked Karoline a question that had been lingering in his mind. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we hadn't met?" She chuckled softly, sipping her coffee. "Honestly, I try not to imagine it. Meeting you changed everything, for the better." He grinned, raising his mug in a mock toast. "Well, here's to changing everything again. Next stop, the world." Though his words carried a hint of humor, they also reflected a shared ambition. What started as a local collaboration had sparked dreams of broader impact. Maybe someday, they thought, their model of unity and cooperation could inspire change on a national or even global scale. For now, though, they focused on the present. Each challenge overcome, each smile brightened, and each life touched reminded them why they kept going. And as long as there were people willing to join hands and work toward a brighter future, they knew anything was possible. As the months rolled on, Karoline and Charles found themselves reflecting not just on what they had accomplished, but also on how much they had grown personally. Their partnership had become more than a collaboration. It was a testament to the power of empathy, humility, and resilience. They weren't the same people who had first crossed paths at that charity gala. The challenges they faced together had shaped them in ways neither could have predicted. Karoline, once hesitant to step into the spotlight, now carried herself with quiet confidence. She no longer shied away from difficult conversations or criticism, knowing that staying true to her values mattered more than pleasing everyone. Her piano performance at the gala felt like a lifetime ago, yet its impact lingered, not because it showcased her talent, but because it reminded her of the strength she possessed when she chose grace over anger. That lesson stayed with her every day, guiding her interactions with others. Charles, too, had undergone a transformation. The millionaire who once prided himself on clever mockery now embraced vulnerability as a source of growth. He learned that real influence came not from tearing others down, but from lifting them up. His friendship with Karoline taught him to listen without judgment, to seek common ground instead of division, and to lead with compassion rather than arrogance. For someone used to being in control, letting go of ego wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Their work began attracting attention beyond their small town. National media outlets featured their story, highlighting how two individuals from opposing sides of the political spectrum had come together to create meaningful change. Invitations poured in for speaking engagements, conferences, and interviews. While flattered, both Karoline and Charles were cautious about stepping into the national spotlight. They didn't want their efforts to be reduced to sound bites or headlines. They wanted to inspire action. At one such event, a young woman approached Karoline after her speech. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I've been feeling so hopeless lately," she admitted. "But hearing your story gives me hope. If you can bridge divides in your community, maybe I can start making a difference in mine." Karoline smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the woman's shoulder. "You absolutely can," she said. "Start small, volunteer, reach out to neighbors, find others who share your passion. Change begins with one person deciding to care enough to act." Moments like these reinforced why they kept pushing forward. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about showing ordinary people that they had the power to create extraordinary change. Despite their growing influence, Karoline and Charles remained deeply connected to their roots. Every project they undertook was grounded in the needs of their community. Affordable housing units continued to provide safe homes for struggling families. Mobile food pantries delivered groceries to neighborhoods still grappling with food insecurity. Mentorship programs expanded, giving more young people access to guidance and opportunities. And Unity Park remained a vibrant hub where residents gathered to celebrate, reflect, and connect. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Karoline and Charles hosted a community celebration to mark 5 years since their unlikely partnership began. Hundreds turned out, filling the park with laughter, music, and shared memories. Local artists performed on stage, children played tag near the fountain, and volunteers handed out free meals prepared by neighborhood chefs. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the crowd, Charles took the microphone. "5 years ago, I walked into this town thinking I knew everything about winning arguments and proving points," he began, his voice tinged with emotion. "What I didn't realize was that I was about to meet someone who would teach me the most important lesson of my life, that true strength comes from understanding, not judgment." He paused, turning to face Karoline, who stood nearby, smiling softly. "Thank you for showing me what leadership really means, for reminding me that we're stronger together than we are apart." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering as Karoline stepped forward to speak. "This journey hasn't always been easy," she admitted. "There have been moments when I doubted myself, when the weight of the work felt overwhelming. But through it all, I've been reminded of something powerful, that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward and touch countless lives." She looked out at the sea of faces, her voice steady and heartfelt. None of this would have been possible without each of you. You've shown up time and time again to build a better future, not just for yourselves but for everyone around you. So tonight let's celebrate not just what we've achieved, but what we're capable of achieving together, as fireworks lit up the sky, signaling the end of the celebration. Karoline and Charles stood side by side watching the display in silence. Both felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the progress they'd made, but for the journey itself. They had faced setbacks, doubts, and criticisms, but none of it had broken their resolve. Instead, it had strengthened their bond and deepened their commitment to service. In the weeks that followed, they began planning their next chapter. Inspired by the success of their local initiatives, they launched a nonprofit organization aimed at helping other communities replicate their model. The goal was simple: to empower people everywhere to come together, set aside differences, and tackle challenges head-on. Workshops, toolkits, and mentorship programs were developed to guide towns and cities looking to foster unity and collaboration. Years later, as they looked back on their journey, Karoline and Charles realized that their greatest achievement wasn't any single project or policy. It was proving that change was possible when people chose empathy over division. Their story became a beacon of hope, inspiring countless others to take action in their own corners of the world. From small towns to bustling cities, communities began embracing the idea that collaboration could transcend barriers and create lasting impact. And though their partnership had started with a challenge fueled by arrogance, it ended as a testament to the transformative power of human connection. Karoline and Charles proved that even the most unlikely alliances could lead to something extraordinary, a brighter, kinder, and more united future. As they sat together one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Charles turned to Karoline with a smile. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" She nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Every day, and I know we're just getting started." With that, they clasped hands, ready to face whatever lay ahead together.